Hi, I'm Rick Wilson with My Family Pattern. I'm excited to share with you an effective and efficient way to analyze your shared DNA matches within a genetic network. I've had great success with this research strategy, and I hope you will too. I call the research strategy forest management for reasons I'll explain shortly. But first, let me define the concept for you. Forest management is an autosomal DNA research strategy where I extract genealogical information from the family trees within a genetic network that I've previously identified. The goal is to look for and find the most recent common ancestors among this group of shared matches within the genetic network. The forest management strategy entails three different stages, and I call them pruning, fertilizing, and harvesting. And I'll explain these here shortly. But first, let me kind of tell you a little bit about shared matches. If you've ever used shared matches, or what is sometimes also called in common with matches, when you're analyzing your DNA, maybe on Ancestry, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, or even 23andMe, then you know what I'm talking about when I say shared matches. But if not, let me explain that a little bit further. Within a genetic network, when we have shared matches, what we essentially have is the image in yellow is my list of DNA matches I have for myself. The one that's in the green color is a separate list of matches that a match you have, they also have a separate list of matches. But what a genetic network is, and I've identified it here as an example with these red check marks, is to say there are some matches in my tree, in my list of matches that are also in the list of matches of my match. These matches that are both on my list and my matches match list is what we call a shared match list, exactly. And these shared matches form what we call a genetic network. Now, I want to explain a little bit more about what I mean by forest management with those three stages of and in doing that, I think the best way to kind of explain this is to use an example for context. One of my particular lines that I've been researching is William Hill, who is from Pennsylvania, and his wife Elizabeth, whose surname is unknown. And what I've basically done is I'm trying to find out what the ancestors are for William and or Elizabeth to try to figure out who their parents and perhaps even grandparents are. So the strategy that I use is I first off starting off with a research strategy called AGOS, which I've explained in perhaps another blog post that you might have read, or I do have another YouTube video that kind of explains it. But in essence, what you look for with the AGOS search strategy is if you want to find out who the potential ancestors are for William and Elizabeth, then what you do is you find shared matches between your ancestor who is a child of William and Elizabeth. In my case, I descend from Susan Hill, and I am the DNA tester that's marked A in the blue box underneath Susan Hill. And I find another child of William and Elizabeth, and I find a match that descends from that ancestor. In this case, it's Anna Hill, and I found a match that has 42 centimorgans in common with me. And what I do is look at the shared matches or in common with matches between myself and this DNA tester that I'll call B. And I'm looking at that shared match group. In essence, what I'm using these forest management strategies is to identify the subclusters within the larger genetic network or within those larger shared matches between myself and the DNA tester B to possibly identify the ancestors of William and Elizabeth. And that's what I'm going to be looking to do. So let's talk a little bit more about what I mean by forest management. Forest management is those 3 steps I call pruning, fertilizing, and harvesting. If you think about what shared matches are, the shared matches you have in common between myself and that DNA tester B who descends from Anna Hill, all of those shared matches, a lot of them have family trees linked to that match. Those shared matches with those family trees is part of that genetic network. And what I want to do with those family trees is I want to manage them to help me identify those potential ancestors for William and Elizabeth Hill. Now, the 3 strategies I have is pruning, which is going to be looking for particular branches that are more relevant to me. Then the next step is fertilizing, where I'm going to be building out my matches trees that aren't as complete. And then harvesting is looking for those subclusters within the larger genetic network that can help point me in that direction. So let's expand on these a little bit more clearly. Pruning. What I am doing here in this phase is I call Gestalt pattern recognition, which means more and less I'm looking at the overall larger picture. I'm not trying to focus in on the minor details of some of these, but rather I'm looking for the patterns across all of my matches within this genetic network. This is a quick review process, and to be honest, in the forest management in all 3 steps, I try to block out a couple of solid hours where I'm focusing in on this, and which allows me to keep a lot of this information in my head and written down, and keeps me focused, and I'm able to see those patterns much more clearly. So I'm quickly reviewing all of the matches in that shared match network, looking at their trees. And what I'm looking for are surnames that seem to appear quite frequently. And let's be honest, there are some surnames that are very common and some that are less common. It's easier to identify and pay attention to those that are less common, and I tend to do that. But still, some of the common names, like the ones I might be looking for myself, might be like Wilson and Hill. Those can be more common, but still I'm going to try to pay attention to that. And I'm going to look at the geographies of where some of these names are appearing. And in my particular example, I am going to be looking at principally Ohio and Pennsylvania, because that's where my William and Elizabeth Hill lived. So I'm going to be concentrating a little bit more there. And when I'm doing that, I'm trying to find potentially those branches that look the most relevant to me. And in terms of the concept of gardening, you might prune those family trees to accentuate those branches that are more relevant, and that's what I'm looking for. And I'm going to use, if you see this graphic to the right, when you are looking at your matches, this happens to be within Ancestry. Ancestry provides at the very bottom of that page for one of those shared matches. There's this map feature where you select on the upper left-hand corner. You can see I've kind of have it highlighted there. It says both trees, your tree, and in this case it says Wilson's tree, which is my matches tree. I highlight that, and what that does is it highlights, you see all of the red or the pink and the blue dots, as well as some of the green ones. Those, if you click on those, since I have my matches tree highlighted, it allows me to very easily click on either those pink or blue dots, or the green ones, which will drill down further and identify other pink and blue dots. And when I click on that, it highlights the ancestor in their tree and where they were born. And that's going to help me more quickly identify some of those patterns and therefore prune or find those more relevant branches. The next step I call fertilizing. And what I'm looking for is any of my shared matches trees that are incomplete, that maybe only have the parent or grandparents, or they might even have an unlinked tree. And I'm going to look at those trees and see if I can determine whether or not those trees happen to be related to the match that I have, or if they have no tree. Regardless, what I'm going to do is what I call fertilizing, which is I am going to try to build out those trees for them. One of the things that I do, and I do this very quickly, which is I use either Ancestry family trees or I use the trees on Family Search. And I enter in whatever information that match provides, and I try to build out those trees. And I do use other people's trees, and I realize there may be errors, but what I'm looking for is, can I very quickly understand what that tree might look like and what are the surnames and locations of where those ancestors are possibly living. And again, I'm trying to do some of that pruning from the previous step. And so again, I use Ancestry trees and Family Search trees to do that. Again, I do it quickly. I take more mental notes than physical notes, but I do rely on both. I also utilize, if Ancestry, for example, uses through lines or common ancestors, that may help me more quickly identify how I might be related to that match. I may contact that match, especially if they have an unlinked or no family tree, to see if they'll share any bit of their family history with me so that I can build out their family tree. I also might look for those matches that I see here on other websites, whether it's, if it's maybe going to Ancestry, if I'm not an Ancestry, or going to Family Tree, DNA, or MyHeritage, or even GEDmatch, because a lot of times the matches will use their same identifier, whether it's their actual name or a handle or a shortened phrase that identifies themselves here, and they'll use that consistently a lot of times throughout the other testing services. So that's the second phase. In the third phase, I call harvesting. So this is where I'm looking for the family tree or some piece of information there that I can take away and utilize that in my research outside of this. And I'm looking for subclusters. These subclusters would be a most recent common ancestor that is either in my tree or within the other trees of the other matches. And I'm very methodical here. Whereas the previous steps, I went very quickly through the pruning and fertilizing stages to look for patterns. Here I'm very methodical. I'll take notes, and if I see value in it, I might create my own personalized tree for some of these matches, but I still don't really do that at this stage. But what I'm looking for, again, are those most recent common ancestors. And sometimes that's in my tree, and I may find that they descend from William and Elizabeth Hill as well, in my example. Or what I may find is that across several of my matches, I'm finding the most recent common ancestor within several of my matches, and that's going to help me later. So let's put this to an actual example. I'm actually going to go out into Ancestry DNA and show you how I use these forest management skills in practice. So again, I am looking for the potential ancestors of William and Elizabeth Hill. I'm using the EGOS research strategy where I'm looking at the shared matches between myself and a descendant that is a sibling to my ancestor, Susan, so in this case, Anna Hill, and I'm looking at the shared matches. And what I'm hoping to discover are those subclusters within that overarching genetic network that may help me figure out where I need to do some research, either within my DNA matches or with the traditional documentary research, that hopefully I can find out, who are the parents or grandparents of William and Elizabeth Hill. So let's jump into my DNA matches and Ancestry, and let me show you how I use forest management. All right, so I've pulled up the DNA match between my uncle. I'm not using mine, I'm actually using my uncle's here, and the other DNA match that we labeled B. And when we're looking at this again, you can see here that I've anonymized everything, but between Michael, my uncle, and Jane, who is match B, I've clicked on the Shared Match tab within Ancestry. And so what you can see here is the list of 40-some matches who are part of the genetic network created between my uncle and that tester B. And you can see here that I've also have the notes here where I've said that Jane is a descendant of Anna, so she is that individual that is that B match that we were talking about. And so what I do is, when I'm going through this, is what I will quickly do in the pruning phase, I will look down at my matches, and if they have a family tree, I will quickly look at it, look to see what patterns are there. And you can see, for example, I've already done this, so you can see some of my notes here. But, what I've done, for example, is let me look at one that's really easy to do. So if I look at, here, let's see. Some of these I've done some of the work a little bit ahead of time. You can see here, if I pull on Kendra and I pull up this match, you can see that the name shows up of who the potential common ancestor is. And if you see, if I click on the tree here, it does follow this Ralston line. And if I did click on it, it would allow the line down to the common ancestor. So that's one that is, very easy to identify. But otherwise, I am just going down the list during the pruning phase and looking at all of the trees. And I just quickly go through them. And let's pull up one here that when I'm doing this, I'm clicking on this one for James, and when I'm looking at it, I go through and I just quickly look at their family tree. And if I'm looking at this, I will very quickly just jump down here and I will click on James's tree. And again, because my ancestor is in, they're from the Ohio and Pennsylvania area, I'm going to quickly drill down on these. And what I will do is all of these that are in Ohio and Pennsylvania, those are the ones I'm specifically going to click on. And for example, I would click on this one and I would see, okay, looking at Barnett, and it's Somerset. If I click on this one, I see it's Man and it's in Lancaster. And I'm going to quickly do that on all of those until I find, I'm making mental notes on what some of those things might be of interest to me. And as I go through multiple of these in a very quick fashion, what I'm going to basically begin to see are those patterns where I'm saying, okay, maybe there's particular counties that a lot of these in the shared network have, or maybe I'm seeing certain surnames. And what I will do then is, for the ones that have like an unlinked tree or a no tree, I'll reach out to them and try to build them for them. And you can see here's one that's an unlinked tree, but I figured out that it's on my hillside, and I'm going through all of these and I'm making notes. What you will notice here is that through a lot of them, I'm seeing there's somebody that descends from a Heinrich, Winland, and Dorothea, his wife, in Lycoming County, Pennsylvania, through their daughter, Susanna. And then here's another one that's my Wilson and Hill line. Another one through Susanna Winland. Here's another Winland that came down from Heinrich and Dorothea through their son John. Here's William and Elizabeth through their daughter Anna. Here's one that I've recognized, then a couple of them that I don't know how they fit in, but this William Fraser was born in Pennsylvania in the 1700s. He married Julia Pickens in Indiana. I have a couple within this group from that, and I've identified that through the pruning and fertilizing phases. This Gloria one, I have no clue on how they're connected. Here's another Hill descendant through my William and Elizabeth, another Winland through John, another William Hill. Here's another Winland through John, another Fraser and Pickens through their daughter Hannah, whereas I believe in the one up above here was through, I think, Julia, their daughter Julia, who so it's a different line. And a lot of them I don't know. Here's another Winland through their son John. Here's another Fraser and Pickens. This one is through their daughter Mary. So you can see I have 3 different children coming down through that line. And then here's another Hill that sends through my line. Another Fraser and Pickens through their son William. So you can see that I've started to identify several different items. There is one here that I've identified as Crow. It's the only one in this group, but through some of my other research by looking at other descendants of William and Elizabeth Hill, creating genetic networks. With that, I've seen this Crow line come up a lot. Not as much as Winland. Winland is by far the dominant one that I've seen across all of the different genetic networks that I've created. And so when I'm going through this, the pruning is very quickly going through all of these family trees that you see here that I can easily quickly go through. The fertilizing is building out any incomplete family trees, which allowed me to make some of these connections here. And then again, the harvesting is I'm noticing the most common ancestors that in some cases, are not to my line, the Hill line, but are to these other lines. So I have this Winland, most common ancestor among many of the ones in the shared matches. Then I have, of course, the Hill ones. I have some of the Fraser Pickens, but those are what I'm doing in that harvesting phase. So that's what I'm kind of putting into context here. Okay, so we've taken a really good look at my genetic network that I found in Ancestry, and I've reproduced it here very simply to kind of highlight some of the things that we found. Again, there were a number of matches that I had within that genetic network between myself and the descendant of Anna Hill that also descended from William and Elizabeth Hill. I also found another large group of DNA matches that descended from Heinrich and Dorothea Winland. There was a smaller group that we found that descended from William Fraser and Julia Pickens, and there was a really small group, there was really only one in the example that I showed you, but I have evidence of others in this Crow group, and it only seemed to correlate with or be having shared matches between the Winland group and the Hill descendants, but not with William Fraser and Julia Pickens, which seems to suggest that maybe Crow fits somewhere on that side, but not on the other side within Fraser and Pickens. So again, I'm not sure how that fits in, but it must be only on one side of either the Hill side or whoever Elizabeth is on that side. There's, of course, a large number of unknown matches that I'm just not able to do. But what this has given me is the ability to say, I need to go out and research Heinrich and Dorothea Windland, see what I can find out about them, and see if I can find patterns associated with them that might link back to my William and Elizabeth Hill. And I will do the same for the other clusters that I've identified too, hoping that I can somehow more definitively tie them to William and Elizabeth Hill. If you'd like to learn more about the forest management principles as well as the AGOS research method that I also used in conjunction with forest management, I encourage you to read my blog titled Genealogy Ping Pong. And in that blog, I describe a little bit more what I mean by ping pong. But if you have your mobile phone with you or near you, you can scan that QR code and it should take you directly to that post. So I hope you enjoyed this learning module, and if you did, I encourage you to follow or subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out some of the other learning modules here, specifically the AGOS research method. Thank you.